right, I think we can get started. Welcome. This is the IETF 97 Technical and Administrative Plenary. And I'd like to thank you for coming here, and I want to thank Matt Ford for taking chapter notes or chapter scribing, and Cindy Morgan and Greg Wood for taking the other types of notes. So thank you for that. And we have a packed agenda, interesting topics to discuss about. Before we go into the agenda proper, I just want to make a couple of observations. So first off, we at the IETF are always on the leading edge or bleeding edge of the technology. Like just as an example, when the industry right now is very focused on 5G, here at the IETF, even our coffee shop downstairs is already looking at 10G. And of course, people ask, what is this layer 3 IP technology? And I would say that by now most people know about that. So clearly, like the mall next door knows what layer 3 is about, food and beverage. And I guess, that's the topic, or one of the topics today as well, attacks, denial of service attacks and attacks against the architecture, as IAB put it. And that's a really tough topic, and the IAB has working on that. And it seems, coming here was a good thing, because we may actually have found who the culprit is. And I don't mean Colin, by the way, I mean the monster on the right. Okay, so we're going to have an agenda which is, as we have done a couple of times now, we're trying to make it quite short in terms of the actual reporting piece and administrative piece. Most of the information has been distributed online on the mailing list, and various pointers have been provided there, so do take a look at that. And we're happy to take questions during the open mic parts or mailing list and so forth, and also between meetings, obviously. But we are going to get a host presentation, then we're going to get some updates on hot topics, indeed focusing more on the things that you should perhaps observe than the reporting piece. So we're going to go through IETF-wide issues, administrative topics, get a NOMCOM update, IRTF, and then we have a session on the Postal Award, and we get a welcome to IETF 98. And then we'll get to the interesting technical topic of the day, which is the attacks question. And then we'll have open mic for the IAB first, and then IOC and ISG. But I think we'll start with the host presentation. So I would like to thank Huawei for hosting us here, and of course all the other sponsors as well. And I'd like to ask Wei Zhao to come on stage.
I'm going to do the 3 minutes movie clip first, and then I have 5 minutes to talk.
We live in an exciting age of intelligence, where human progress moves at the speed of imagination. Commerce, industry, and society, all evolving. Human communication ever closer. Society more effective, and a lifestyle beyond expectations, driving a vision of limitless possibilities and endless opportunities. Connectivity is redefining how we communicate and how we live. Tomorrow's world will be completely new, with things we just dream of today finally realized. Inspired experiences, transforming the way we engage and interact with the world, each and every day, transcending current limitations. Connectivity is shaping our society, enabling more open and closer collaboration, providing fast-paced innovation. cities are safer and energy is greener. Universal competition and collaboration across trades or geographies is a reality as industrial transformation breathes new life into businesses across the globe. A new world is being unlocked as agile innovation unleashes the potential of enterprises and society in a heartbeat. Connectivity is the cornerstone of everything. Human to human, human to machine, and zillions of connections between things. We believe that connection is the privilege of everyone. Real-time, on-demand, all online, DIY, and social. This is the way we define connection in the near future. Ubiquitous broadband making all this possible. Without limitations, any place, anytime. Welcome to our future. A world with infinite potential. Breakthroughs in ICT technology, making our society more intelligent. Cloud, big data, SDN, and IoT, all driving mankind's migration from the physical to the virtual. Barriers and boundaries are broken down between technologies, countries, businesses, and industries. In an open, shared ecosystem, Huawei is committed to building up connections to the whole world, helping enterprises and industries to be more efficient and collaborative, inspiring individuals unlimited dreams. When we're all united, we believe we are building a better connected world.
Thank you very much for watching the 3 minutes of a video clip. My name is E and I'm from Huawei, and I'm going to take the next 5 minutes to quickly go through a few slides to share some of our vision and the thoughts about the future. The first is we believe we are now standing on the threshold to the fourth industrial revolution. So you all know the first one is mechanization, the second one is electrification, and the third one is automation. So we are getting to the fourth one, which is intelligentization. Basically, is everything is intelligent and everything is connected. So the ICT, information communication technologies, and such as mobility, cloud, big data, and IoT, and will form the foundation of this fourth industrial revolution, intelligentization. And also you see the ICT enables the digital economic transformation, which is very critical for the national competitiveness. A couple of examples you can see here. For example, like a Singapore Smart Nation program, and also the Industry 4.0 from Germany, AMP, which is Advanced Manufacturing Program Partnership 2.0 from US, and Made in China 2025 from China. So the research indicated a 20% growth in the ICT investment will actually increase a country's GDP by 1%. So that's a huge impact, enable the digital economic transformation. And also we see that the ICT, information communication technologies, they provide power to the enterprise production systems and provide smart functions and to boost the efficiency and efficiency. The ICT integrated with all those vertical industry and integrate with the enterprise production and to improve the efficiency and to increase the opportunity for innovation. So the industrial digital transformation that needs new ICT architecture and also a new ecosystems. So in the future, you look at the IT systems, it's more on the real-time business platform, big data analytical platform to provide intelligence and to support the decision-making. In the middle, and there's a huge network layer, try to connect it to every kind of different kind of devices, from industrial devices to consumer user devices. So everything is business-driven, and we'll see the new ecosystem and agile innovation. We believe there's a new benchmark for user experience. And it's more focused on the real time. That means the ICT infrastructure will be faster and broader and on demand. It's all scenario based, timely and on demand, and all online. So everything's online, the real-time content, responsive, and also easy to share. DIY and the social. So that's a smart devices, multi-screens, and very diverse. So all those combined together, we call this ROADS, ROADS, real-time, on-demand, all online, DIY, and the social. That we believe, will become a new benchmark for user experience. To power the ICT innovation, and you see the new and emerging technologies, we just listed a few of them here: cloud security, artificial intelligence, robotics, and the multi-core IC, VR, AR, etc., etc. And the world is becoming a better connected world is coming, and the connectivity is becoming the new norm. So by 2025, we are expecting the 4 billion new internet users, and around the 27 cities, they have more than 10 million population each. 8 billion smartphones in use, and 100 billion connections, and 1.5 gig data usage per person per day, and $3 trillion US mobile payments. So the world is, the connected, better connected world is coming, and connectivity becomes very important. Huawei is committing to build a better connected world, as the video clip indicated. And we focus on the ubiquitous connectivity, agile innovation, and inspire experience through the continuous innovation and open up cooperation based on the customer needs and leading technologies. So in this, the new world, better connected world, so connectivity is so critical, and as well as the standards, and which help it for the connect each other and the interoperate each other. So we are very proud to host this IETF 97, as well as host the 2016, this year's IETF hackathons. And thanks for the opportunity. And also we want to thank to our co-host, CN Nick, specifically the Sheldon Lee. I think we probably saw him several years ago as a still show up in the IETF meeting, but now I know he's become the big leaders over there in CNIC. So we want to thank him, and also thank Lin Kong, probably in the audience, and working with us to co-host this IETF. I also want to thank the local host, KRSA, as well as the various sponsors and listeners here. That's it. Thank you.
So So I also personally wanted to thank you. The hosts and sponsors are absolutely necessary for us to arrange our meetings. So we all are grateful for you to do this for us. So thank you.
Thanks. Can I take it now? Yes.
All right. So I wanted to go through a couple of general IETF-wide topics, and then we'll talk about administrative issues after that. So I'm going to cover the meeting and the participants just a little bit, give you an overview of the statistics, remind all of us of our professional behavior standards, mention what has happened with the IANA stewardship transition effort, talk about something that we call IASA 2.0, talk about mailing lists and networks, some IT issues within the IETF networks. And online, I have a couple different versions of this actually, but here's probably the best or easiest accessible one in the blog series. And it covers notable events here, talks about what new working groups we've got, which ones we've closed and changed. We got 6 new working groups after the previous IETF. Lists the ideas that are currently under consideration, the two BOFs this time. And then also points to a non-working group mailing list that we get now and then, and some of those lead to later BOF or working group efforts. We got no appeals, and then provides a status report on the IETF website renewal project. And there's also a bunch of other reports from the RFC editor, Secretariat, IANA, NOC, Hackathon, and then of course I, as well as others in the IETF leadership and active participants use the blog series, IETF blog series, to publish things that are happening in and around the IETF that we feel is important, so do take a look at that. The meeting and the participants, from my point of view, the highlights, maybe the one important thing to notice that we did have some very interesting topics and packed rooms. The quick meeting yesterday, for instance, was a full room. I think some people were standing even though it was the biggest room that we could allocate or find. And that is, of course, very interesting work. I think it has already had a big effect on the internet and will have a big effect. So it's appropriate that people are interested in that. So let's get that done and let's do it carefully. Also, we had the hackathon, as we usually do, before the IETF for 2 days. And exciting things are hacked on there. At this time, one observation that I would make is that we had good student groups there. For instance, we had from Sun Quin Quan University, if I can't pronounce that properly, but the I2NSF team consisted of students from there, and they seemed to be having a lot of fun and had their own wardrobe as well for the event. We also had the MPTCP team where they had I think 5 people here and 20 students back home in Belgium, so that was quite interesting. And of course the IETF is not just about our formal IETF working group meetings, it's also all kinds of other events during and around the IETF, interop tests and whatever else, and we are very glad that such events happen around the IETF. So if you have ideas for those, please ask if we can help with that somehow. This time, for instance, we had the OPNFV organization had their first ever ASEAN meetup on Friday. That's great. And IETF 97, then the participants we had, I think this is data from this morning maybe. Alexa, can you confirm? Can't see you. Anyway, roughly from this morning, 982 people on site, 154 are first-time attendees. This is a little bit down from our predictions, which I think there were 100 plus people more than we actually got. For various reasons, I think Leslie and Ray will go into that a little bit later. And 52 countries, which is a good, that part of it is good result. Yeah. Professional behavior, we've been talking about this many times, but it's not a bad idea necessarily to remind us about it again. Plus, of course, we have some new people here as well. So the IETF has standards for code of conduct and a policy for anti-harassment. We have a best current practice document, RFC process for dealing with harassment cases, if any. And we've set up a team, the Ombuds team, that is helping with these issues. And the team has been active this year, gathering training and setting up their procedures. And they're very helpful and easy to talk to team. If you can stand up. Pete, Alison, Linda. So if you have any issues, how small, no matter how small, just talk to them. They should be able to help you and have a discussion at least. Oh, and they have a particular tag in their name tag, the green Ombuds team tag that you can use to help identify them easily. And during the last 2 years, the IETF has been involved along with other organizations in the IANA stewardship transition, which is about basically letting these organizations, IETF and ICANN and the RIRs, run the IANA system as we basically have already, and not be bound to any particular governments in that activity. And that has consumed quite a lot of our time. And now that actually did go through and succeed. Agreements became in effect on October 1st this year. So for us, that's not a huge change. We're doing basically the same things that we've been doing previously, just that there's no other contracts between ICANN and US government on that front. For us, we got an updated SLA between ICANN and IETF. The IETF Trust had promised and has now taken ownership of the trademarks related to IANA, and we are also about to receive the domain names, IANA.org and so forth, and then some procedures around that. So we actually have to set up a registrar to handle some of that or set up a contract with a third-party registrar to handle some of that stuff. So we're still doing that, but that's going to happen shortly. And I think we've closed, or at least I sent the message to close the IANA Plan working group yesterday. So well done. And now we can focus on the real work, I guess. The actual technical stuff, not be disturbed by this too much. So, but this is a good change. This allows us to focus on what the community actually wants and not worry about the sort of political issues or impacts in the rest of the world. Just to do what the internet community wants to do for each specific piece of the IANA system. So 2.0, so the IETF's administrative arrangements date back to 2005, and most of us probably don't even remember what kinds of problems we had at the time before this was set up. And like the IETF chair wouldn't know how much income we got from meeting fees, for instance. Now we have very accurate accounting, and we are in charge of the whole system. But it has been 11 years. The practices have served us well. I think they still do serve us well. But the system has also changed, or the world has changed around us, and there's some new challenges. So we're starting to look at the needs going forward. Leslie has documented some of the changes that have happened in the last 11 years. In her draft, take a look at that and provide feedback. We'd like to set up a project where we, the IETF community, can perform a comprehensive review of the system. Where are we? And what can we improve? And it's important to remember it's that some of us might have seen some practical issues that have not gone as well as they should have. We can and we have tried to address some of those practical issues, but there's also maybe more structural question marks like why is the IETF trust and IOC the same members? Is that actually necessary? What the interfaces are between different parts, and how do we name people to these organizations or these boards? And I think now is a good time to do that review. For instance, before the INA transition was completed, it would have been difficult because we were in the middle of doing some of those setups and contracts. Now we have better ability to do that. And I've heard some complaints occasionally on how we do those administrative things. This is your chance, this is our chance to look at that critically and do the evaluation. So if you feel something can be improved, let us know. And step one in this process is actually setting up this project. So the actual substantive comments, try to get through creation of this effort first, make sure that we have a place to discuss and so forth. But we're very happy to take feedback on this. A couple of IT-related things, IETF mailing lists, DMARC. So DMARC, SPF, and dekeying techniques are used to fight email spoofing, among other things. And in DMARC in particular, it's possible that if you're an email provider, you can have a policy where spoofed emails should not, from your domain or supposedly from your domain, should not be accepted by other people. Unfortunately, this is at odds with some common mailing list practices. Let's say if you edit the subject line, add the list name in front, or some of the practices relating to how you bounce messages and what you do with the bounces in cases of lists. Those features will interact, and there will be pain, or there actually has been pain already, and the pain is probably going to increase. And any action, including inaction in this case, will have some consequences. So some pain the world is not perfect in this space. The ISG understand that we need a decision, perhaps some action, and is preparing for this. And we are working closely with the tools team and email experts on what our options are, and the plan is to post a proposal to the mailing lists, IETF at IETF.org, and make a decision within 3 weeks. Now, the situation is somewhat fluid because technology and people's practices around the world are changing, so we predict that we'll have to reassess that decision or actions after a while, maybe 6 months, but we'll probably have to do something in the short term as well. And of course, we invite feedback on all of this as we get the mails out, and there's been some discussion, of course, on the lists already on this. The other thing that I wanted to note is that we have a number of test networks in the IETF set of SSIDs and so forth. IETF-NAT64, for instance, and these are there for us to use them and report bugs and fix the bugs, have an effect on the world. If you find something that doesn't work, please report it. So do try that. I think that would be helpful. And I also have a question, what do we do more long-term or going forward with some of these things? Would it be useful to further develop and expand some of these networks and their usage? As an example, the NAT64 thing that we have currently is not necessarily production quality because we don't have, fault tolerance set up for that as an example, and we don't have a lot of data collection mechanisms that allow us to track what's actually happening or what's breaking in the network. And some of that might be useful. So if you have ideas on that, what could we usefully do, then that would be helpful as well. You can comment here during the open mic session or on the IETF at IETF. But I think that some of that would be useful. I myself today reported that Spotify doesn't work under NAT64 for some reason. Okay, so that's my part, and I think next up, Leslie Ray Tobias, if you can.
Evening, everyone. So get started here. This is a brief overview of what we're going to cover this evening. Our attendance did fall below our projections. We had anticipated 1,120 paid attendees, and we're down at 996. Yokohama was 1,350, so I don't think it was too unreasonable to expect that we're going to get at least 1,100 for this particular meeting, so it's disappointing. Mike. Okay. You didn't miss anything. It's all right there. We had 238 registered remote participants. There's a lot more than that who are participating remotely but have not registered. Interesting, we have lots of universities that are online, and you see the distributions across the different regions for example, North America, Europe. Registration revenues, like I said, is down. It's down about 100K, and I don't see that going up for the remainder of this particular meeting. And sponsorship revenues are down over 60K. There is a Thursday Tech Talk. Andrew Malice is going to speak tomorrow, and seating is limited. Food is limited. Yes, there's some free food. So you'll want to get there early. Did that change? Okay. Also want to thank our hosts and co-hosts, Huawei. Thank you all very much for all the work you put in and the contribution you made to us. Kissa and CN Nick, co-host, thank you. Google, the welcome reception, thank you. And the hackathon, we have Huawei is the sponsor for this, the hackathon for the entire year. Barry Lieber co-chaired that, and with Charles Eckel, who is with Cisco and also used part of their infrastructure. Bits and bytes. In addition to the folks that you see on the screen here that are going to participate, we will have 4 teams from the hackathon participating. We had over 115 folks at the hackathon, so they're going to provide demos of the work that they had done. We had lots of sponsors at this meeting. Thank you, Nokia, OSI. You've seen the Korean Tourism Organization booth out there. Please stop by, and they have lots of materials for you to take a look at. And we had lots of other help. Getting connectivity wasn't particularly easy this time around. We usually get our connectivity contributed. This time we spent about $60,000. $60,000 for our connectivity. And but that was only happened as a result of the work of NTT and ISOC Korea chapter, and we thank them a lot. And it wasn't easy getting letters of invitation arranged in this particular environment. But through the work of the Korean IETF Forum and OSHA, we managed to get it done. I want to thank D.Y. Kim in particular for his efforts making that happen. Every Saturday we have a code sprint, and here are the folks who participated in that this particular week. And if you're interested in developing tools that are used by the community, we'd welcome your participation in that. And we have a fabulous NOC team, the volunteers, the Verilyn, the MediaEcho folks, and we want to thank them for their help. And I think, is this yours?
Yep, that's me. But maybe we can actually,
Back up.
maybe we can actually all thank all those people that Ray just ran through. So it's a really interesting thing about how this is set up, at least for people of my stature. The comfort screen is not in fact very comforting because it's exactly where I can't see it. Here we go. So I wanted to say a few things about committee appointments. In Berlin, we had put out a call for people to volunteer for the various committees of the IAOC. And so we have, we would like to thank very much everybody who submitted their name and offered to volunteer for one of our committees. And these are the people who have, in fact, been appointed. And now I'm going to have to do that horribly embarrassing thing because I can't see the comfort screen. I actually have to wear the damn middle-aged glasses. Sorry. Yeah, so thanks very much to Michael Richardson, Avridoria, Yang Huaru, Lars Eggert, and Joel Halpern. Some legal matters. We've been referring to this obliquely for the last few IETF meetings. Now we don't have to be so oblique. The case has been, there's been a case, it has been dismissed with prejudice, which means that at least in theory, it won't come back. And you can read all about it on our webpage. So Ray alluded to some of the status of this meeting, and I wanted to take just a few moments to take a step back and look at where we are at financially, where we know we're at in terms of 2016, i.e. year to date, and also how we see things shaping up for the rest of the year. So with the information that Ray presented, well, I guess he didn't go into the year-to-date stuff. In terms of how the finances have worked out for our first two meetings of the year, we are currently actually running over our budget for the contribution from ISOC, which is to say, in normal budget parlance, we are in the hole $169,000. Seoul is bringing a few more challenges insofar as Ray did mention, the sponsorship, there's a shortfall in the sponsorship, and we did actually have to pay for the circuit costs. And with lower attendance, we have lower revenue from meeting attendees, which is all fairly obvious if you stop and think about it. So overall, we're looking at essentially $369,000 over budget for this year. So is that the end of the world? No. Because, thankfully, we have the Internet Society that backs us up, and so we are not in sort of the normal expected financial situation for being $369,000 over budget for the year. So we should all add to that a big thank you to ISOC for that. I should also take the step back and point out that we knew that 2016 was going to be a year of adventure at some level because we were going to Latin America for the first time. And we've already discussed what a successful meeting that was in terms of broadening our horizons and engaging more people in the work of the IETF. So I don't want to lose sight of those factors, even as we have to recognize that, you know, if we take on adventures, we do actually have to look at how we're doing financially. So with that, I thought I would take the opportunity to say just a word or two about looking at 2017. So in adopting the budget for 2017, there's some modifications to the sponsorship program, which is implemented by the Internet Society. The overall target is $2 million. What's new in 2017 is that we've adjusted the offerings in the sponsorship program to align with the requests of people who have been interested in being sponsors, but maybe not finding the benefits that would line up right with their interests. And there's more program info that's actually published on the website. I put the URL here because I thought maybe this should stop being our best kept secret. And in fact, I'd like to be a little bit more explicit in terms of a snapshot of what we're looking for to make the IETF go in 2017. And I appreciate that a lot of this is sort of like la, 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 somebody else's problem, la, la, la. And maybe you're not the person in your company who's the right person to be thinking about doing sponsorship for the IETF, but maybe you know the right person who is. So maybe you could have a look at the page. You can see that some of the available sponsors offerings are not huge in terms of budget impact. It's a really big lift to host a meeting, but we have a lot of other available options for sponsoring the IETF. So if you do know the right person in your company to think about this, please point them at the material, and the relevant person to get in touch with is Howie Baggett at the Internet Society. And yes, standing up over there, he's ready and willing to take your credit cards. So thank you very much for thinking about that. And I am happy to say that this slide, which is, was updated only a few hours ago, is actually out of date. Not all of these opportunities are still available. So meet up with Howie as fast as you can, because we're going to have a word in a moment or two about some updates to this. Thank you.
Good. And maybe now to one of the presentations that usually the most challenging one to make interesting. Let's see how well I'm doing today. So this is the IETF Trust Report. And I would say actually going along with the IETF Trust Report, normally actually there's not much work at the IETF Trust. However, the last 3 months were quite, I would say, outstandingly busy, considering that we had the honor to implement the IANA transition agreements. And actually, I mean, when I say honor, I really mean it that way. I think it was a very good step, and it was worth the time and effort we spent on that. So thank you to everybody here for helping us do that. The IETF, following that, the IETF has executed on the last day of September successfully the following agreements with ICANN. The ICANN IANA IPR assignment to the trust. So we took these IPRs into the trust, the community agreements between the trust and the operational communities, and the 3 license agreements from the trust to ICANN for sublicensing to PTI. So, yeah. However, after these agreements, we of course still now have to execute on these. But my current impression is that this is much less work than the stuff before. So we have received the documentation, and we are submitting stuff. We are sorting out the things with the registrar. So all these are quite straightforward operational issues that we can address and solve. In addition to that, as a second component for the trust is that we also have to look at the trust finances. As a quick reminder, as you might know, like since 2016, we are actually reporting the IETF trust finances separately from the IAOC. And one good thing is we have received approval as a 501c3 charity in the US in September. And we have opened a bank account. Yay! So we can take money. Here is a quick overview about our statement, our financial statement. As you can see, this is actually really small money. In the past, it has been small money, and in the future, we also hope it will not be too much. However, this year, because we had this great fun with the IANA transition, we had much more legal expenses for the review and negotiation, as you can imagine. Here you can see some September actuals, year-to-date actuals, and budget actuals, but actually I think the next slide is a little bit more clear, because on the very right column you can see the variance. So we had a planned budget of about 69,000, and this is actually also what we plan for the future years in a more stable look going forward. However, this year, as you can see, we had a deviation of about 35,000, which is mostly due to additional filing and legal fees. We consider that a one-time expense. Equally, as IETF trustees, we have, of course, to consider we may not know everything that's coming our way with the IANA IPR. So we will have to think about things that might come up when it happens next year. We don't know that yet. Good. With that, thank you very much. Questions for later at the open mic. Thank you.
Thanks. And Lucy, if you can come up, talk about Nomicon.
So hopefully this will be short and sweet. This slide shows you how to reach us. We are a group of 15, 10 of us voting members, 5 of us ex officio. We have been meeting here this week and have so far conducted about 2/3 of our candidate interviews. We have 34 interviews scheduled for the week. The positions to be filled were announced at the last meeting. The thing to note here is the stars on the slide. Those 6 positions are completely open. The current holder of the position is not standing again, which brings me to my last slide. We're entering phase 2 here, where the NOMCOM will make selections out of the pool of candidates that we have. We've struggled this time, as in several years past, with getting enough nominees for, in particular, INT, transport, and ops. We want to thank everyone who has agreed to stand. We have a nice selection of viable candidates. Every nominee in the pool strengthens the community through their willingness to serve. Every nominee is willing to serve. I've heard a couple of suggestions that there's some padding. We don't do that. Every nominee you see listed in the data tracker is standing, which brings me to my ask. Please provide feedback. We rely on the community feedback to inform our decisions. There are a lot of things to balance here. We are looking for your views not only on the candidate, but on your area. So if you want to provide generalized feedback about the IASG, the IAB, your individual areas, please write to the address on the slide. If you want to provide feedback on the candidates, the easiest way is to use the tool in the tracker. We are looking forward to completing this process, and we want your help. Thank you.
And thank you for your effort and your team's effort. Lars, if you can come up to talk about IRTF. If I can find them.
Or not.
Just a moment.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lars. I chair the IETF, which is the Internet Research Task Force. Normally, nobody looks at me when I stand up here. This is pretty weird. You can all look at your laptops again. Makes me feel way more comfortable.
The slides are on the laptops.
The slides are on the laptops. Okay. Third from the bottom. This one. Haha. Why is it called CESA? I don't know. Slideshow. Pause. Right, now I actually know what I want to talk about. Right, so we had a bunch of IETF meetings this week. We have 11 research groups chartered at the moment. 10 of them met, so that's a lot. I want to just point out there's a new one that's still to meet, the Measurement and Analysis for Protocols research group. I have an extra slide on them. They got chartered after the last meeting. You can think of those, if you've been around for a long time, as the restart of the Internet Measurement Research Group, IMRG. The focus is slightly different. They want to focus more on using internet measurements to provide information for protocol engineering, but by and large, it's the same thing. I'm very happy that we have a measurement-based group again. On the Applied Networking Research Prize side, we give a lot of prizes to measurement papers, and it sort of seemed weird that we didn't have a group to discuss this stuff in more regularly. So highly recommended. They have interesting talks. Some other news, the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group met already. They have their first draft going through last call. There was a lot of discussion about this already. There was a lot of press about it because apparently IAB chairs quoted philosophers, and that makes the news, at least in some countries in Europe. But they would like to see broader review because sort of the document, although it's not a consensus document of the IETF, talks about the work we do and what implications this has on society. And the more eyes they get on a document, the stronger the content will be, and hopefully the more universally accepted the content will be. I think it's going to be a long research group call. It's going to be for 4 weeks or so, but you can send your reviews right now if you want. Gaia is the Global Access to the Internet for All research group. They're planning an academic workshop in Cambridge in the UK on local networking. It's in January. If you want to go there, contact the chairs. There's a website there. Gaia has really interesting meetings usually. Oftentimes they're not at the IETF meeting, but sometimes they are. This one will be good. The Applied Networking Research Workshop, we have 2 things now that start with Applied Networking Research. In hindsight, that was maybe not the greatest naming choice. This is the workshop. We had it for the first time in Prague last year. It's an academic peer-reviewed workshop, co-sponsored by ACM SIGCOM. We're going to have it again in Prague in the summer. We have 2 TPC chairs that overlap the IETF and academic community. Proceedings are open access. The call for papers should be out shortly. If you are an academic, consider sending some applied work there. If you are an IETFer that arrives on Saturday or earlier and wants to do something fun, I can highly recommend this. We had really good talks in Berlin, and I'm sure we're going to have great talks in Prague. It's an academic workshop, and we like to fly students in. Last time in Berlin, I think we had enough support or money to fly in 6 or 7 students from India and South America. So if your corporation would like to support this, come talk to us. We're happy to take money, like pretty much every other body around the IETF. The other thing is the Applied Networking Research Prize. We're doing this together with ISOC. We've been doing this like for 5 years now, so you should all know about this. We had the last 2 presentations for 2016 already at the IETF Open meeting. If you missed it, I think at least one of them is going to talk again, thinking about it more. I think it happened at Routing Working Group, which already was also happening, so you missed those, but there's proceedings that you can look the video of. They're usually my favorite part. The 2017 selection is just starting. We had about 40 nominations, so not quite as many as in 2016, but on average, I would say the quality is at least as good. So I'm expecting that we again have a very good selection for 2017. At the moment, this is supported by Comcast alone. Again, if you would like to give money to this, we use that money to bring the prize winners back for further meetings if what they have presented has gotten traction somewhere in the IETF. Talk to Matt Ford from ISOC. He'll be happy to hear it. These are the 2 talks we had. One is a routing paper on fibbing. The routing people probably heard about this. The authors there, especially sort of the senior people, are quite well known. Jen Rexford in routing space, I probably don't have to talk about her. The other paper is a multipath TCP paper. Both of those are Olivier Bonaventure students, which is pretty impressive for a professor to have 2 prize winners on very different topics that came out of his team. I'm stepping down in March. The IAB has selected Alison to succeed me. There's her CV, but many of you probably know her. She's been an AD and been around the IETF for a very long time. I think that's an excellent decision. I'm very, very happy. Not only because I'm done, but also because the IAB picked her, probably more than that. So welcome, Alison. In Chicago, you'll be up here and I'll be down there. That'll be fun. And I think that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, we are going to have something interesting about the Postal Award. Gonzalo, can you come up?
Given the Postel Award has been done semi-formally, traditionally, so I'm going to be reading verbatim the briefing I got as the tradition, following the tradition. The Jonathan B. Postel Service Award was established to honor John Postel's extraordinary work and leadership in developing the Internet over the course of his career. John was truly a trailblazer for many of the foundation elements of the way the Internet works, especially those that are related to the IETF. He was the first editor of the RFC series, first director of IANA, a member of the IAB, and served as chair of the IRTF. For the Internet Society, John Postel holds a special place in our history. He was one of the founders, the first individual member, and served as trustee from '96 until his untimely death in '98. Of course, John's work was important, but equally important are the principles embodied in that work. For example, the ideas that some things belong to everyone. Some things ought to be done things simply because they are the right thing to do. The differences of opinion are to be tolerated or even embraced as opportunities to see new issues we are grappling with. One of these ideas, the robustness principle, was captured in RFC 793 nearly 35 years ago. After his death, the Internet Society established the Jonathan B. Postel Service Award to honor John and others who, like John, have made notable contributions to the global Internet community. The Jonathan Postel Service Awards past honorees, shown on this slide, have embodied the selfless, cooperative spirit that defined his contributions to the Internet and the Internet community. These individuals also serve as the awards selection committee. And the 2016 Jonathan Postel Service Award honoree is Kashana Kasur. So before giving the floor to Kanchana, let me read what the committee said about her work. For her pioneering work, her 3 decades of devotion in Thailand, and for enabling countless others to spread the Internet across Southeast Asia and beyond. The award selection committee noted that Kanchana's decades of work includes bringing the first Internet connection to Thailand in 1986, playing a pivotal role in bringing Internet connections to numerous other countries in Southeast Asia, setting up the Internet Education and Research Laboratory at the Asian Institute of Technology, starting the Asian Internet Engineering Conference in 2005, which is the biggest computer science conference in Southeast Asia, and helping to establish the first open Internet exchange point in Southeast Asia, the Bangkok Internet Exchange Point. Please join me in congratulating Kanchana Sud.
All right. I am very shy in this community because I know many people here, but I never been. This is my second time in IETF, and it's very a newcomer to this community, and hopefully I would have more opportunities to join the work that you are doing. I like to, it is my great honor to accept this prestigious award, John Postel Service Award, which is, to me, very meaningful because I learned of John Postel 30 years ago through a friend of mine. He's a member of IETF, Robert Els. So I think many of you, especially the elder member of this community, would have known him. He helped me establish the first email connection from Thailand. And ever since, I have not stopped working on, doing something with the internet. It's been a great opportunity for me, and many people in the IETF community has always been available to help me. So thank you, and thanks the Internet Society for this recognition. And I'm sure the people who helped me would share this award with me. Thank you.
So I wanted to take the opportunity to invite folks and welcome them to IETF 98 in Chicago, but frankly, I'm the wrong person to do it because I'd like to invite the host up for IETF 98, Gonzalo.
just to be clear, now I'm talking as Ericsson, just changing my hat, not as ISOC. It can be confusing sometimes, since ISOC is involved in sponsorships as well. So to be clear, I'm talking as Ericsson today. Usually, the host of the next meeting, he's able to present something about the venue and say something nice. Unfortunately, that's not the case today. So yesterday, actually, Ray talked to me, and he said that we don't have a host for Chicago. So I said, look, I mean, if in the next 24 hours you can find someone, that's okay. Otherwise, I would probably do it. I realized probably that didn't give him the right incentives to But anyway, so today, like a couple of hours ago, I talked to him, and as Yari said before, I think it's important that we are able to find hosts and sponsors for this type of meeting. And so basically, no, Ericsson will host the IETF in Chicago. Also, I thought it would be a nice, let's say, farewell celebration for Yari as IETF chair, and not because we are glad to get rid of him, but it's kind of, getting him back also to Ericsson. So, welcome to the Windy City, and see you in Chicago.
Thank you. Next up, the IAB Technical Plenary. So the Sullivans and Suzanne, if you can come up on stage.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, evening. And we are here for, it's a tough act to follow, Kanchana particularly, but we're here for the IAB Technical Plenary, and we're here to talk about a new class of attacks on the internet architecture, or perhaps just some insights we hope are new. As pretty much everybody knows, there was an attack on the internet infrastructure on October 21st that compromised access to some well-known resources and caused an explosion of attention on DNS, the Internet of Things, mass compromises of internet-connected devices, and the business and operational models underlying the provisioning of content at internet scale. The IAB were preparing an entirely different tech talk, but there was an immediate sense that there are some ideas to pull out of this experience, so we switched tracks in order to address some of the potential insights under the surface of a headline-making incident. Nobody wants to be in the middle of such an incident, but afterwards, there should be things to learn. As a DNS person myself, for instance, I spent a lot of time in those first few days answering a lot of questions about how the DNS worked, how the internet works, and trying to correct some of the more alarming things that people were saying. But pretty quickly, it was obvious that there were things to learn here that went beyond one large provider's no good, very bad day, or the challenges in providing one particular service to the modern internet. This was an attack on part of the internet architecture itself. So we asked Nick Sullivan to come and talk with us from Cloudflare. We also asked our own Andrew Sullivan to speak to the subject, both because and in spite of him being an employee of Dyn, the provider who was attacked, and an IAB member. So he's here in both capacities. But we're hoping both of them will provide some insight, some perspective on mass-scale internet attacks. But primarily, we think there's some underlying and concerning observations to make here, and would like to see some discussion of the implications of perhaps new insight on vulnerabilities of the architecture of the internet itself.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Nick Sullivan from Cloudflare. I'm going to kind of go over some lessons that we've learned in terms of, oh, this is moving on its own, in terms of dealing with large attacks and really staying online. So the talk's called How to Stay Online, and it starts with sort of a little bit of a dark tone, but DDoS, it exists, and it's going to be part of all of our futures. And running infrastructure is difficult, especially in a hostile environment. And I think the main reason that I'm here is can be described in this Twitter account. If you follow it, this shows the Mirai botnets and all the attacks as they go on live. And this is not something particularly new. Botnets exist. They've existed for a long time. This is just an example of botnets at a larger scale. And they send a mix of attacks. So when you think about DDoS, or when you talk to someone about DDoS, this is really what you think about generally, is this sort of reflection amplification attack using some amount of compromised machines and reflecting off of a protocol that does not validate source address, perhaps using UDP. NTP and DNS are two of these examples. And this still goes on, but it's not really the majority of the type of attacks that we see nowadays. So what I'm going to cover here is the popular attacks we see now in 2016. What are people actually doing? And these break down into three main categories. Some of these are old. Some of these have been around forever. These are not, they shouldn't be new to anyone. But I'm going to describe ways that when you see attacks of these types at magnitudes that are very large, what you can do. So DNS floods, SYN floods, HTTPS floods. I don't have to explain to anyone in this room how DNS works, but when it comes to attacks on DNS, there are two main types. First is direct attacks on the authoritative DNS server from a botnet. Second are attacks that go through valid recursors and are laundered by these recursors before they move to authoritative DNS. The first set are typically larger volumes than the second. Direct to authoritative. The question is, if you're faced with a flood of requests at your authoritative DNS and they're not from resolvers that you know, then you should be very suspicious. The DNS architecture is built to go from these endpoint stub resolvers to the recursive resolvers to the authoritative DNS. And if you see a lot of packets and a lot of requests, you should probably just drop them, and this is potentially safe. And this is really the only way to stay online for direct to authoritative attacks. So what do these floods look like? Typically, these are requests for your apex domain, your www domain, or random subdomains of these two. And the reason that they go after random subdomains is that it costs more for you to look it up as a DNS server. Sometimes they come with spoofed addresses, source addresses, sometimes not. In the case of the Mirai botnets, they're oftentimes not spoofed addresses, which makes them slightly easier to deal with, but not by that much. DNS Flood Survival Kit. So this is one idea, this is one thing that used to be done quite a lot for actually protecting against these type of large attacks, and that's null routing IPs. You take the IP that's under attack and you advertise it upstream so that it basically falls off the internet. This is a pretty dangerous thing to do, and it has lots of repercussions. Lately, attackers have been flooding entire subnets, making this very unreasonable in terms of a defense mechanism. Furthermore, these glue records that you use to point to your DNS servers, they have long TTLs, and changing them is not something that's very feasible at the moment. So this is not something I would recommend at the current point. But there are two main techniques to keep yourself up if you're running this sort of authoritative DNS infrastructure. The first is spreading the load And then the second is filtering. Filter fast and filter often. One way to spread the load is to run an Anycast network. This allows you to spread the load geographically. Network hardware does not scale linearly in price. If you have a 10 gig piece of hardware, it's not going to cost 10 times more to buy a 100 gig version. It's really horizontally, if you can make sure that the amount of traffic at each of your data centers is low, it's cheaper, it's easier to handle. Spreading the load not only geographically, but within the data center, ECMP is a good way to do this. Filtering packets, going down from the top of the rack to the actual DNS application, filter as early and as soon as you can. There are different mechanisms you can use at different levels that can handle different amounts of packets. If the request gets to your DNS application, you might as well just answer it at that point. So the main way to handle a large flood is to make sure that only legitimate packets get to your application. There are a number of ways of doing this. One is IP tables, BPF rules. These are very powerful techniques that you can use to match and block packets inside the kernel. And these can be automated, which is very important. There are tools, open source tools, to create BPF rules that match attacks, but this is not something that works with a static configuration. You really have to move fast and change them very often, because if you have too many rules, it can cause problems in other situations. So heuristics, machine learning, attacks change. The attacks that you're going to see from one botnet are not the ones that you're going to see from the other one, and it's going to change from time to time. So this has to be very dynamic, but you do have the ability to sample from different places to see what the types of attack signatures are and figure them out. Some of them are very easy to identify, some are more difficult. But if you have static rules, you're probably going to go down. And if possible, move the rules outside of your server and move them into the network interface card. This can really help relieve the load. DNS floods are sort of very closely tied to this other type of attacks, which are attacks that go through the recursor. This is which attackers will, from their botnet, send DNS messages that end up at your authoritative server, but they go through recursors. This is very different. You do not want to block and drop these attacks. The right response is to answer. Recursive DNS is making requests for legitimate customers, and they treat however you answer their requests as a relevant state for them. So if it's possible to whitelist known recursive DNS servers, do so. This is very helpful and the right thing to do, because if you rate limit, this can cause some negative effects, including an amplification of the request as the recursive servers try to test to see whether you're back online or not. So rate limiting is not a very effective method for this. Really, you have to handle the packets. One technique that was suggested for this is every request that comes through, this is also randomized subdomains. So they bust the cache of the resolver before they hit you. And if you can, there's a technique in DNSSEC called the NSEC record, which is a cache of a negative answer. Currently, you can only, in the resolver, cache this for negative ranges. Potentially, caching this for non-signed ranges might help. Just one of many different options of keeping the traffic from going all the way through to the authoritative server. DNS attacks are not the only types of attacks. What made this botnet and a lot of the current attacks very damaging is that they go through multiple protocols and multiple types of attacks. SYN floods, this is classic. This has been around forever, but it's still very effective. If you don't configure your TCP stack perfectly, it can cause some serious problems. Using BGP Anycast on the TCP side also lets you say, I understand which regional, non-regional IPs you should expect SYN packets from. And there are IP tables, BPF rules that you can build for this as well. So SYN floods, also very difficult to handle, but they're often mixed with the DNS attacks. HTTPS floods, this is much more common, and this takes up server resources by sending HTTP requests over an established connection. The good thing about HTTP is it handles rate limiting very well. You can rate limit by request, rate limit by volume, and for these types of attacks, a simple TCP reset will get you a long way. If the attack is HTTPS, the attackers may try to take advantage of some asymmetry of the cryptography, and there are ways to mitigate that using elliptic curves as one. There are proposals for things like client puzzles, but those are not implemented. So these things are all mixed together, but who is attacking us, or who is attacking the internet's infrastructure? Generally, this is compromised endpoints. And if you think that this is going to get better before it gets worse, we haven't seen the first major IoT worm yet. We're in the early days of this new set of devices that are running software, and this software is getting old on a lot of these devices. So it's probably going to get worse, though there are ways to think that it may end up getting better. One key thing is if there is a viral aspect to this. So if you have a device that's going to be compromised, it has to be found to be compromised. IPv6 has a place here in making things difficult to find by scanning the entire internet. Building these IoT devices is really closely tied to the economics. Margins are very thin. So things like a secure by default open source software, if that was available, people would use it. Investing less time in development helps your margins. Secure firmware update life cycles, these things are very hard. As we've seen from the Windows desktops to iOS to Android, it takes a long time and a lot of perseverance and a lot of developer effort to build these ecosystems that allow you to update these software pieces. It's not clear that in the IoT case that this is something that is in the near future. Another piece is attribution. If you know where the attacks are coming from currently, source IP is something that can be spoofed. NetFlow is something that can help identify real sources, even without source IPs. This is something to think about. Now, I've kind of described some technical ways to protect against DDoS, and these shouldn't really not be new to anyone here. These are the same problems we've been facing for years and years. They're just now at a much larger scale. And it's exposing certain things about the internet itself, and things that we've known, which are that the internet has choke points. And as attacker bandwidth grows, they can target these choke points. And things like Anycast, things like being able to stop the attack as close, or stop bad traffic as close as possible to the edge of the network or the entry point of these attacks is very valuable for actually protecting these choke points. Anycast is just one of these techniques that allows you to do that. If you're subject to an attack, keeping your costs down are very important, and this is the only way to really sustain a large-scale enterprise is to not have to pay a lot of money for these very large attacks. Luckily, many internet protocols are asymmetrical, and they have great caching semantics, broadcast, HTTP, for example. So you have extra capacity on ingress if you're using multiple protocols in the same data center. Scrubbing centers, sometimes these can be very expensive because they're single use, and you pay for the maximum of the bandwidth. So it's good to spread things out, keep things spread out, and distribute the load and filter early. And this is sort of a sunny final end to this, but I wish it wasn't this way. But staying online, now requires scale. So this is something where you have to be big, you have to be smart, and you have to have tools. And you have to work together with other people to try to stop the attacks close as possible to the edge. And the techniques I described here try to approximate this as much as possible. It is possible to survive these large attacks, and it is possible to survive in an internet ecosystem in which attackers have exceedingly large bandwidths. But this involves really paying attention and doing things right on multiple levels, all the way through your stack, and thinking about your architecture and building things so that they can handle it. And that's the end of my sunny presentation. Thank you.
And we'll find the other. I was thinking of Nick's, thank you very much, Nick, and I was thinking of this as sort of the setting of the big picture, and I guess we'll have Andrew draw in some details and some finer points, and then we'll have your questions and comments.
If I put a clock here, then I won't just talk forever. So I'm Andrew, for those of you who know me as the chair of the IAB. I also work for this company called Dyn. It's called Dyn, not Din. That is dynamic rather than the noise that you heard when everything broke. We had a bad day recently, and and I think...
Take two, they're small.
I have the wrong version. There are two of them up there. This looks just like what I put up.
No, that one's mine.
That one's his. He's also Mr. Sullivan.
There's no relation.
So this is the problem with naming. You see that you need unique names. We should have had a hierarchical system, and then everything would have worked. So I want to talk a little bit about what happened during this bad day, and then I also want to talk a little bit about what it means for the internet architecture. And I think there are a couple of things that I want to say here. I mean, the first thing is that there was a large number of devices, but the attack is really against some desirable attributes of the network. And I think that this kind of, or this style of attack actually could attack a bunch of regulation, or could attract, rather, a bunch of regulations towards us if we're not careful about it. And so what I would like to argue today is that we should actually do something about this ourselves. So what happened? Okay, well, these were attacks against some Dyn infrastructure, and it was noticed because there were some systems that depended upon us, customers. And that's what happens, you get one of these things. Nobody knew about us at all before this event, and our marketing people are really of two minds about this whole thing, right? I, however, didn't want to know. Now, I want to emphasize that I didn't do any direct work on this because I've been an internet politician for the past 2 years, and so I'm now useless to my employer. And what this meant was that our NOC and the operations people did all the work, and NOCs and operations people do whenever there's a crisis, they did a great job. So I want to thank them, and also a couple of people at Dyn. Chris Baker and Phil Stanhope in particular fed me some of these things. So they fed me this stuff, but of course the conclusions are mine and all the mistakes are mine. in any case, this led me to some questions about the DNS infrastructure. Now, our infrastructure is an Anycast-based system that is mostly transit-driven. There are reasons for that, but the primary thing is that we did this because we had a system that allowed us to do certain kinds of management to avoid exactly this kind of problem. It didn't work out in this case, but in the past it's worked very well for us. And the point of this is to get this this system, which is fairly large. It's in 18 sites, and the diversity of this thing was arranged in such a way that you didn't tend to have this kind of problem. So what happened? On the 21st of October, about 11:10 UTC, we had a thing start up, and it was like a normal DDoS, and these happen all the time. It was targeted, across our systems, and the NOC started doing the usual runbooks that they always do for this kind of thing, and then suddenly the whole thing changed, and it moved to this U.S. East region. We're doing the same DNS tricks that everybody else is doing in this area, so we've got these regions, and what happened was there were way more addresses than normal, but also the attack pattern was a little different than normal. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So this caused some resolution failures, that is, things just didn't get answered, and also it caused some long latency on things, which those of you who are familiar with the DNS, you know that if the latency is long enough, it's just like the thing isn't there because you just ignore it. This lasted until about 13:20 UTC. And then we had another one. So this, we put in some mitigations, and the mitigations worked, and the attack stopped. And they were mopping up the way NOC always does, and of course, while they were mopping up, another attack started, only this targeted all of the servers in the world that we had. So we knew a little bit about how this thing had worked, but of course, we hadn't actually made the changes globally, so naturally, it was still widely observable. This we recovered by about 1700 UTC, but there was some sort of hangover that we still haven't completely figured out what happened there. But there were some resolvers that weren't able to reach us, and they were not small, obscure resolvers. One of them is operated by a company that used to start with a G. So what was unusual about this was actually that, we've seen lots and lots of sort of standard amplification attacks, but this particular attack had a really, really high proportion of TCP, and we don't normally see that in these kinds of attacks, because normally it involves a lot of state on the attacker side as well, so they don't do it. And there's very little spoofing in this, or I shouldn't say very little, but comparatively low spoofing. We have definitely confirmed 40,000 addresses involved in this botnet, but maybe something like 100,000 addresses in the botnet. Now you're probably saying to yourself, gee, that's not a very big botnet. But think a little bit about DNS and TCP and what happens when you've got 100,000 members of your botnet and they're all opening, say, 10 TCP connections to your DNS servers, and you can see how this thing can expand fairly quickly. The other thing about this was, of course, as we started to have problems, we've never had this problem before, but the recovery retransmissions by some of the resolvers actually served as a sort of second front. So we got this sort of second wave amplification, which caused us some problems. We definitely had a Mirai-based botnet. We've done a bunch of forensics on this. We've identified pretty much where these things were and not who was behind it. And we still, as I said, don't exactly understand what this hangover was, but it did cause a sustained outage, even though everything was up, and we haven't completely explained that. I want to emphasize that I do not believe this was a one-off. There was a previous attack just a couple of weeks before this that was very, very large. We know that the Mirai botnet code is out there, but it's being improved upon by various people, but it's not the only botnet code that's out there either, right? I'm sure you all have your favorite DDoS example. So, what showed up in the press was Internet of Things takes down these people, and that's what the problem is. Internet of Things is bad and evil, right? So it's a Mirai botnet, and those of you who aren't familiar with this, that's using these Internet of Things devices that are easily compromised. And there was an Internet of Things dimension to this attack, but I really want to emphasize, I don't think that that's the main story. Because this attack pattern uses the very thing that makes the Internet strong, and it's using it to attack the way the Internet works. I think that this is an irony, right? What we've got here is an attack of irony against the Internet. It's astonishing to me. So back in the easy time, what would happen is the attackers would, buy a bunch of things in some provider. They would, go and check in CADA or something like that and make sure that spoofing was allowed from there. And then they would set up their botnet and they'd have their botnet army and they'd send you a lot of stuff. And this was, typically UDP, and there was a lot of spoofing and so on. These were cheap and effective. But what happened, of course, is that people got better at scrubbing. And they got better at soaking these things up because, you just outrun them. And it turned out not to be that hard. The cost of transit's going down, cost of processing's going down, and so people said, well, we'll just win this thing forever. I remember actually being mocked a couple of years ago when I said that you're going to run out of money before they run out of compromised hosts, and everybody said, no, we'll beat them. Well, I'm afraid we're here. So the first answer to all of this is to get really big, right? This has been the answer. What you're going to do is you're going to have like lots and lots of Anycast, and you're going to have CDNs all over the place and everything like that. And what I'm worried about here is that what we're building is no longer an intranet but an oligarchonet. That you can't actually participate in running services online unless you get really huge, or at least large enough that you're spending a significant amount of money on your infrastructure. That doesn't seem to me to be the internet that I thought I wanted to build, and it might be that that's the thing that we've built, but I think we better ask ourselves whether we should be so proud of that if that's what we've got here. There are problems with this. It creates monoculture. It creates the associated security problems. It also means, of course, that the distributed nature of the internet that we keep talking about is no longer true because you've got these giant providers who are involved with everything. And it makes for high barriers to entry, and I don't think that that's a great arrangement. Nevertheless, I think it's obvious that the Internet of Things is going to continue to create these kinds of problems. It encourages this ubiquitous connectivity, and even very, very lightweight systems, things that are not very powerful, have enough power to open a few TCP connections and so on. And what they used to say about the budget, right? Like $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking real money. Well, the same thing is true here. If you've got, millions and millions of these devices all over the place, you're going to have a lot of compromisable hosts, and they make that available. The other thing, of course, I want to point out is that people talk about the Internet of Things here, but it isn't only that, right? A lot of the devices that we're talking about aren't really Internet of Things devices so much as there are just consumer devices, and they're intended to connect to anything at all. So they don't have a hub, they don't have a home that they call back to or anything like that. They just connect to anything they can, and those things are compromisable as well. Now, the vulnerabilities are pretty bad. One of my colleagues did some work on this and discovered, we had like 4.1 million unique A records hanging around, so he did some poking at it. He found 10% of the devices in the sample were affected. Now, 300 devices doesn't maybe seem like very much, but of course this was only 4.1 million IP addresses, which also isn't very much. The other thing, though, that he noticed, and he put this on a slide that he presented somewhere, was this use case encourages owners to open them to the internet. This really bothered me, because it seemed to me that the whole point of this was to connect everything to the internet. That's why we're here. And so if our answer to this is, well, we really need to discourage people from connecting things to the internet in order to prevent the security from getting out of control on the internet, then we have failed completely. So remember that we had this dumb network that we wanted to build. We wanted to maximize the intelligence at the edge. You could still have a dumb device or whatever, these Internet of Things devices aren't that smart, but they're still supposed to be smarter really than the network. They're not, the network's not supposed to be making the decisions. This is, it's got all the usual good stories, the permissionless innovation at the edge that we all talk about and so on. The problem is that this is what makes for the attack that we're talking about. It's a really bad story when those end devices can attack you. And it's not just compromisable things, right? You could do this by leaving a lot of devices in coffee shops all over the place, and they're all perfectly secured because they're controlled by the bad guys. That'd be another way to run this attack. You could do this by compromising a whole bunch of machines that have not been updated in a long time, and they've all got ubiquitous connectivity. That's another way to do this. There's lots and lots of ways to do this. The insecurity of devices is not the main problem. It's not DNS or UDP specific, so things like BCP38 don't solve it. And if you add more providers, it doesn't automatically solve the problem. It just causes more barriers to entry, because what happens is you're in an arms race, and you're in an arms race against people who have an infinite supply of hosts that they can throw at you. I've heard people already making actual proposals like this. So the first one, of course, people said, well, the government should mandate BCP 38, which wouldn't even have worked in this case. So, so that's not a very interesting thing. There are people who want to give licenses for connections either to devices or to humans. That'd be a fun thing to do. We'll get a global, worldwide internet license police. I've definitely heard people talking about, and I think this is coming, folks, so be ready for it. I believe that people are going to implement the submission port for DNS. So large recursives are going to get preferred access to authoritative servers, and everybody else is going to have to talk to through some recursive. If you think that we have a problem in the concentration in the mail world, imagine if we do that for the DNS too, and now we have changed the nature of the internet quite a lot. There are lots and lots of things that we could do in order to reduce the openness of the internet in order to solve this problem. Now, 50 years ago, there was a big change to the automotive industry. Prior to the publication of this book by Ralph Nader on Safe at Any Speed, I mean, this book is mostly famous for destroying the Corvair, right? Corvair was a car in North America, and it destroyed that. But the more important thing that this book did was change the nature of the automotive industry in North America. From an almost completely unregulated system where people could build stuff and they just put them on the roads and no big deal, into a very heavily regulated industry. And people, even automotive industry people, so I got a quote from him, right? Bob Lutz, who was a big automotive industry person, he has now come to believe that this book had a seminal effect because it made sure that there was definitely a role for government in automotive safety. Bob Lutz, who opposed every single one of the regulations that came from this, he still thinks it was a good idea. Transformative technologies, like the automobile and like the internet, attract attention from cultures. And the culture, if it's transformative enough, the culture says, okay, we're going to let you in, we're going to make our lives around you, but what we're going to do is we're going to extract rules about what you're going to do from that. We're going to start imposing rules on you. And I think that the internet is at that point. We're facing it now. I think there are things that we could do ourselves. One of the problems with regulating the internet is that the structure is not like the automotive world, right? So the car world, the thing about it was that cars are in a place and the roads were mostly publicly owned. But neither of those things is true on the internet. The infrastructure is mostly privately owned, and of course, the way that the structure works, the network of networks and so on, means it is very hard to know exactly whose behavior it is you need to change. So there are things, however, that we could do that are built on this kind of system. We could ask ourselves whether devices or applications or whatever could advertise the kinds of traffic they want to send or whatever. We could try to get applications to work in some kind of scope so that you know whether you're supposed to be inside this network or not. These are general questions that I have. I don't know what the answer is. I noticed that HomeNet, which met today, is working around these kinds of things, right? What we're trying to tackle there basically is what you do for people who have a network that is effectively completely unmanaged, but it wants to be like really super sophisticated. It could be that there are various kinds of feedback mechanisms that we want. I will note that, for instance, source quench doesn't work anymore, but maybe you need something like that. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not proposing that we revive source quench, so please don't get up to the microphone and tell me that. I guess the general thing that I want to point out, however, is twofold. First of all, we have to be very careful here because it's really easy to propose simple solutions that actually just invite a new kind of attack. So we move the problem around. And I've already heard people complaining about DNSSEC in this way, right? DNSSEC solved the problem of spoofing, and it solved that by making the DNS an excellent amplifier. And so maybe this is, something to think about. The second thing is, I believe that if we do not think about and answer these questions ourselves, somebody else is going to answer those questions for us. And it's not going to be answered in rooms that look like this. No t-shirts are going to be involved. So not all regulation is automatically bad, and I want to emphasize that, right? The fact of the matter is that the automotive industry was not putting seatbelts in cars, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that wearing your seatbelt during a collision makes it less likely that you're going to die, and that seemed like the sort of thing that like would just be obvious. Okay, so we'll put seatbelts in all the cars, but the automotive industry wouldn't do it. That was, in fact, what Ralph Nader's complaint was. That the industry was more interested in, its own profits than it was interested in spending a few $100s a year per car on improving safety, or durability, or efficiency, or the pollution state, or something like that. And so what happened is that the regulators stepped in and did it. The problem with this kind of regulatory environment is that it causes long lead times, and it creates perverse incentives. One of the interesting things about the North American automotive market is that the rules were different for cars and trucks. So what we saw was this explosion in light truck traffic on US and Canadian roads. And the reason for that was that the incentives were set up so that the automotive industry had a reason to push those things. So we want to be careful about that. And that's the reason that I say we are the people who ought to tackle this problem. We have to tackle this problem because we understand the technology, we understand what the incentives are, and we understand the nature of the underlying thing. And if we don't do it ourselves and we don't tackle some of these perverse incentives, somebody's going to come along and do it for us. So I don't have a magic solution for you. I wish I did, but I hope that this has been a little bit of food for thought, and I hope that we can have an interesting and useful discussion here in the IETF plenary. All of you are smarter than I am, so the chances are good that you're going to be able to come up with something better than I would anyway. Thanks very much.
Wow. So while everybody's thinking about that and thinking about your questions, I'm going to put Yari on the spot. I need a time check because I forgot to ask. How long do you think we have for? Okay. I guess you're first. Center mic.
Olaf Kolkman. Question to you, Andrew. What you just described with the car example was Nader pointing to existing solutions that were not implemented by the market. The seatbelt was already available, as I believe. I think that we are in a different situation here. We don't seem to have the fundamental solutions.
Does this work? It does, okay. It just doesn't have a little light, so I don't have an indicator. So it's true that the seatbelt was something that that already existed, but actually Nader's book is really instructive. I like the automotive example just because it's so transformative, but you can find this in other kinds of industries. Actually, Nader's complaint was not just that they wouldn't implement stuff that was known already, but they wouldn't do any research on alternatives either. So they weren't working on other kinds of stuff. They weren't trying to find new things. They weren't trying to make the car more fuel efficient or safer or anything like that. And I think that both of those kinds of things are going to be important, both for our industry and for other industries. But I think we're the ones who can talk about this one.
Okay. Far microphone. Front, stage left.
Kathleen Moriarty, SecAD. So, Andrew, I wish you were, I hope you're right that this is a turning point, but evidence looking out at interest in system hygiene, it's, for IoT, it's not there. For open source, if you talk to leaders of open source efforts, they're literally saying, and exclaiming that security will come later, right? So even these big efforts that have leaders who have seen things fail, having not had security built in from the beginning, are still proceeding in that way because they think features first matters. The other thing, we have a working group here called SACM, and it's moving really slowly, and they're working on being able to validate system hygiene, but there's not wide interest in it, right? There's not a slew of vendors in there. There's a few people from the customer side. How do you see this balance of you think we've reached that point, but we have all these other factors that point otherwise?
Well, so sometimes the answer that people give me when I get gloomy and doomy like this is they say, well, that's an economics problem, not a technology problem. And my response to that is that if you think that technology problems and economics problems aren't the same problem, then you're missing the point. That in some fundamental way, either we figure out how, amongst ourselves, how we're going to do this, or somebody will come and tell us that we're going to do it. And I think that's the point that I'm really trying to make here, that we have lots and lots of evidence in every industry that if the technology becomes important enough, other people will come along and tell you what to do. And this is especially true in the Internet of Things area, because most of the so-called things that people are hooking up are already regulated, right? The light switches and the light bulbs and the toasters and the refrigerators and everything like that, they're already electrical authorities who are just dying to extend their power into the network. So I think that we have a self-interest here in our industry, and we are going to have to figure out how to convince our collective industry that we need to put the money into this. Now, one thing that we might want to do is redefine, at least at the standards level, what we might want to do is redefine the way we tackle these things, so that instead of talking about features versus security, we actually talk about features exclusively in terms of their security properties, or at least partially in terms of them. And we could do this maybe by thinking a little bit about how we describe this in documents. Because today what we do is we have, this long document that describes all the features, and then at the end we say, and by the way, these are the security properties of it. And if we could figure out a way to distribute that through our documents, maybe that would help. I don't know.
Okay, so that just hit a trigger. I mean, if anyone's interested in helping on data models to validate security of different device types, whether it's Yang or something else, SACM's going to be open to, is open to contributions, but they're also very flexible on what is used to do that validation, knowing that different device types will use different interfaces, and so they have to be accommodating of that. And that's one way to get towards hygiene and automated checking of it. So help is welcome.
Okay, I'm told we have a remote. Go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Elliot Lear. First of all, I want to thank the IAB for putting on a really great technical topic. It's really well done. Congratulations to Kathleen and Andrew and the rest of the IAB and the other speaker from Cloudflare. I just wanted to say that, first of all, I really enjoyed your presentation, Andrew. I'm also the person who wrote out MUD, with the manufacturer usage description document, which you can find in the Ops Area Working Group. I think, Andrew, that your point is that there's room for everybody to be part of the solution here. So what is it that endpoint manufacturers need to do? What is it that router and security manufacturers need to do? What is it that governments need to do? And what is it that consumers need to do? And I'd suggest that the IAB is actually in a very good position to write out some advice along those lines as we develop new technical solutions. And I couldn't agree with you more that if we don't do it, others will, and they'll probably do it poorly. Thank you very much.
No, I don't think so. Did you want to comment? Thank you, Elliot. Back to the center microphone, please.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Juan Carlos, well, my comment is actually following up from Elliot's. I think he's got a point that nowadays we have evolved. So we can learn definitely from the past, and the examples you gave about the automotive industry are very valid. But we can also learn, for instance, from the IANA transition that moved to a multi-stakeholder idea. So I think, and I wouldn't agree that we are in the best position, but not only as the technical community, but also representing manufacturers, the commercial, the civil associations, and so on, because we need incentives. We need to make this thing work, and it's in everyone's interest. So instead of promoting the alienation that lately is happening a lot between, no, this is my realm, that's your realm, we're different, we don't speak to each other, actually encourage us trying to get these communities work together and basically make the internet work. You got a point, and the fact that you say this is a different idea. It's not public, it's private, public, civil, individual, commercial. So we have to think of it differently. Thanks.
Thank you. Left-hand microphone, please. Yeah, center. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Hannes. I think it's a good idea, as Andrew said, to start the dialogue, but as you have put up on the slides, the solutions or the only solution you mentioned there is one that is quite natural for this type of community. You have network equipment manufacturers in your IAB. And so the solution is, of course, you have a firewall in the network that filters traffic. And that illustrates the problem. While you say we need to reach out or you need to be inclusive and so on, you actually need to get these other people on board because they are currently working on all different venues. And specifically, there are very few chip manufacturers in the IETF who could contribute this. Also from the rest of the value chain of that industry. That makes it very difficult to come up with a solution that they would even recognize. Richard Barnes and Keith Moore and myself have put together a document that focuses more on the security of the IET device itself. And if you look through it, you will notice that it's actually not so easy to come up with some recommendations that could potentially be enforceable by a regulation in the hopefully better style of PCI DSS. And so I encourage the IAB to reach out to those other stakeholders and not just to look around the usual suspects who obviously see a great opportunity to sell some new firewalls. Because I don't think that alone will sort of solve the problem, if it will solve the problem at all, because those parties who had not been interested to use any security mechanisms, they will hardly be interested to implement or even know about this other security mechanism. So it's like, it sounds a little bit bizarre when they haven't done the obvious thing. Why would they do like manufacturer certificates with some new innovative description with some firewalls in every network?
So I'm really glad that you pointed out that there are multiple ways or multiple levels that we got to tackle this at. And I agree with you. I was sort of trying to keep the examples light, just because I mean the potential here is very wide, but I think you're exactly right that we don't want to use only one strategy. And this is part of the reason that I was so happy that Nick was here to join us, because it's nice, for instance, to have an operator speaking at an IETF meeting. I think that's a thing that we don't get often enough, and so like we're all going to have to do this, and I think that you're precisely correct about that.
Thank you. And I think the left microphone is next. Oh, do we have a remote? Okay, then I think you.
Is that me?
Yes,
or
that would be you.
Okay. Henning Schutzwini, I spend my days in Washington these days, and the notion that you can just say, oh, we'll solve it next year, or after the next big one, or whatever. I mean, we've had similar problems on PCs, on mobile devices, and most of those are not protocol problems. It's not like somebody discovered a vulnerability in a crypto algorithm or in TLS or whatever. These are just pretty dumb implementation problems, as in hard coding passwords is not exactly a BCP level thing that we need to write up. And I would bet that none of the manufacturers that were involved in that particular botnet, recognizing that this is just one instance, are presented or have ever attended the IETF, and are unlikely to be quite honest. And the exhortations from the day isn't going to change their behavior. I mean, that's just recognizable, and I think government people are smart enough to recognize incentives, and currently there are none. And Hannes mentioned PCI DSS, and I think that's an instructive example where, in case you don't know what it is, it's where if you accept credit cards on your web server, you have to get certified. Every month somebody pokes your web server and makes sure that you have implemented all the CVE remedies that are there. Otherwise, you don't get to accept credit cards. That's not a governmental thing. That's because we have two big entities, Visa and MasterCard primarily, that control that particular thing. I'm not sure that's a better option in that. So I do encourage people to come talk to government agencies. I certainly be happy to talk to people. I do advise that we will solve it somehow at some point indefinite in the future with some magic is not a good starting point of that discussion. Because usually that means somebody in the political realm will have to take the blame because they haven't done anything. And they're usually much more visible than the people in this room, I hate to say. So solutions are very much, this is a fertile time for proposing solutions, but there can't just be, oh, we'll all just sing Kumbaya in a room and we'll all just get together and we'll solve that magically, simply because there's no evidence that it has worked for the past 20 years.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. Anybody who thinks these problems are new should go back and read about what happened when people realized that there were going to be cable boxes always on the internet. I'm going to close the microphone lines now because we still need time for the IAB and IAC, ISG, but Senator Mike.
Dave Crocker. So thank you for this session, not just timely, but nicely done. And I think you raised some basic questions that we then have the challenge of figuring out not how to answer as much as how to talk about. And I think the kinds of questions and issues you raised point in the right direction of trying to understand how to talk about that. So for regulation, I liked that you distinguished between what really are two kinds of regulations. The low-hanging, relatively easy fruit to at least think about is requiring use of things that already exist with known efficacy, benefit, cost, and all the rest of that. One might call those standards with teeth. The other are the aspirational ones, thou shalt eventually reduce pollution by some amount. Those only make sense if we have a good basis for believing we know how to achieve those. Even if we don't know now how to, we have a skill set that says we're probably going to be able to. For much of this topic, my sense is we're not there. We need to be, obviously. The low-hanging fruit I characterized as standards with teeth. One of the challenges of regulation in this space is there aren't that many bodies with the scope to do regulation across the entire internet for enough of the things that might need regulating, never mind that we don't have consensus on what the regulation should be. A comment that was just made hints at a point that we need to keep in mind. The internet has been under attack many times at the architectural level. They weren't necessarily malevolent, some of them have been, but many of them have not been. We have exceeded limits, we've exceeded styles of use, and we have broken things. NSFNet broke the backbone routing service. In fact, it was being broken periodically, but NSFNet institutionalized it and forced the creation of BGP. In the late 80s, and I think there may have been more than one of these, but there was a burst of activity to deal with TCP congestion, to deal with certain kinds of efficiencies, and there was almost a cornucopia of efforts, some of them very disciplined, some of them very narrow. We don't really have an equivalent marketplace of what really is research. It's very focused research, it's very practical with a goal of very near-term delivery. And the discussions that surrounded that, I mean, it was pretty cool in those days to come to an IETF meeting and watch the various proposals being talked about and justified. And that's what we need to, I think, move to pretty quickly.
Thank you. Next at the center, Mike, and then I'll go back to the left.
To me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, hi, Bob Hinden. Yeah, thank you again for doing this. This is very topical and important. I'm actually personally pretty terrified about this. I agree with one of the Sullivans up there that this is just the beginning of something and it's only going to get a lot worse. I think the IETF needs to do something, you know, because it's easy to see that regulation could happen, but I don't think anybody knows what the regulation would do. And it's particularly hard, I think much harder than the car example, because the internet is so international, is that you could have, just for example, have good regulations in Canada, but then you're going to get bot attacks from the US, or, you know, substitute any set of countries. So unless it's all fairly uniform, it's not going to help too much, or at least as much as it should. So I think we can do a lot to help. I think a lot of the problem here is in having endpoints that don't get turned into botnets. And I think we can, besides making the protocols better, I think we can also write words down, you know, have best current practices of what reasonably secure devices are, and then that'll give people who build them or sell them, or if they have to regulate them, have something to actually look at to base that on.
Thank you. Far left microphone, please.
Tom Herbert. So I'd like to give one example in the open source community where we're trying to address part of this problem. So I believe Nick mentioned that Cloudflare was using IP tables and BPF, and we're getting about 1.2 million packets per second drop. Over the past year, we've actually been looking at this. That number is really pretty bad when you think about it. And we can increase that by tenfold with something called Express Data Path, XDP. And it's kind of interesting because we've been working on this and people kept asking us, why is a packet drop so important? Why are you focused on this? Well, it's for denial of service, and hence we have this discussion. So I think that kind of validates where we're going with a lot of that.
Thank you. Center, please.
I'm James Woodyard. My ears perked up when I saw that slide that talked about the you must be this tall to ride problem. And I know this is a discussion about whether the internet architecture itself might be potentially a thing that is something you could point fingers at as this is why we have so much risk in our system. And I think to myself, okay, so what are the architectural features of the internet that make it so that it's a playground for asymmetric warfare, right? And the first thing that comes to mind there is that, well, some years ago, I was the technical editor for an RFC that described the simple security characteristics of residential gateways, where the idea was unmanaged home networks, but gosh, they have to have a firewall that is completely unmanaged by people. And I worked on that despite really not wanting to, because from my perspective, I wanted there to be, you know, a transparent ability to get in and out of home networks so that it was possible to build applications that you didn't have to be running a secure data center with lots of centralized pipes. You could distribute data around the edges of the network and maybe have another way of making something that was robust against distributed denial of service attacks. I'm not sure whether that's necessarily a way to solve this problem, but we kind of built an architecture that says, no, that's not going to be possible at all. We always turn on firewalls that block incoming connections from, you know, unexpected remote addresses. Arbitrary remote addresses can't get through these firewalls because they're always turned on. And it seems to me like we sort of did that on purpose. I don't know how we can change that part of the architecture, because there seems to be like widespread consensus that this is all good and that's what we have to do. But it's the thing that makes the internet an asymmetric warfare playground. So if we're going to live in a world that's forever going to be asymmetric warfare until the end of time, maybe we just kind of have to like hope that people who do policy and regulations will tell us how they want it regulated, and then we can build technology to apply those policies. But we're not a policy development organization here. We're just like engineers.
So yes, but I think you put your finger on something here. So I think you're right that we made an actual decision at some point to change the, right, we pretend that we've got this dumb network with all the intelligence out of the edge and so on. And then if you look at it, actually, we've got classes of network that are in there. So it's already false, because you've got access networks versus, infrastructure networks and providers networks and so on. And these are really different classes of network. They have different properties. And we sort of pretend to ourselves that they're all the same, but they really aren't, at least the way they're deployed today.
Mm-hmm.
The deployment is not really, it's not really completely separate from the architecture, right? That there's this idea that you've got the architecture and then you've got this completely separate thing of deploying it. And I think that that's sort of lying to ourselves. But what this means, of course, is that we could decide that what we wanted to do was build protocols that tended to distribute data in a secure way instead, and tended to push things back out to the edge. Now, maybe we got to do that in a network that doesn't allow the sort of arbitrary point-to-point connection that the original internet model had. But if we think about this in terms of the kinds of services and data that we push to various places, it could be that actually what we would be doing is recreating that older feature. And the reason to do that is because the purpose of all of this was to get the data moving around. And so maybe what we've got is like this hangover of this kind of kludgy middle thing with all the firewalls in between and so on. And yet you still might end up with the properties of pushing the things out to the edge so that the applications that are living out there on the edge would have the local freedom to do these kinds of things. I don't know how all of that sort of picture of the future plays out, but it seems to me that if we started thinking about alternatives to the way we've deployed stuff that looked along these lines, and actually turn our gaze to a system that was there in the past, we might learn something from it, and maybe we could recreate some of the advantages that we had before.
Will the IAB be taking up this question in its challenge in its future deliberations?
That's an excellent question. I guess the IAB is going to march up here in a little bit, and you can grill us about whether we've really got a plan for this. I can say that I do not have a plan for how to do this. This is like a bridgehead thing that I've got here. I've got this idea. Here is the sort of problem that I have, and I know I've gotten this far, but it seems to me that if I look out that way, it's a different picture than if I look out that way. And maybe I can figure out which way to go next.
Thank you for making this presentation.
Thank you. We're running a little bit short on time, but we're doing okay. And Eric, you're next.
Eric Nordmark. So I think it's clearly that from an operational sort of the scale of the internet, the thing you talked about in terms of the focus on how do we cope with these attacks, right, or these sort of malicious load spikes, that's something that we have to figure out how to get better at. But as people point out, this is asymmetric, right, in terms of the cost to the attacker versus the cost to defend against it. If you have these things with admin, username, password, the cost to attack is close to zero, right? So I think that, yes, we don't actually build those devices that sit at the edge, but maybe we have expertise here in the IETF in terms of what's the sort of state of the art, what software can be used. If we invite those people and show them some running code, right, maybe we can help move that side forward as well. Because I think that we should figure out how we can look at the whole end-to-end part of the puzzle and not just only look at how can we defend it inside the network. And then we might be able to get to solutions quicker here. Sure, we will still have attacks, right, of various forms from various devices, but we can move the whole front forward as opposed to only moving one half of it.
Thank you. Center mic, please.
Lorenzo Colli, two things. First of all, for the NAT64 network, so the EIB recommends that all networking standards assume the use of IPv6 henceforth and be written so they do not require IPv4. I would posit that if we're here at the IETF to do work, then that's what the default v6 only network should be. So we should make the network NAT64 by default, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to design protocols. So with that in mind, another thing. So if we want, we like end-to-end, right? And if we want the internet to be end-to-end and we want it to be secure, then the security has to be at the edges, right? Otherwise, we can't continue the existing model. Now, before we throw away the model, we should try to fix it. Now, the observations here is, I think, the security models of, I don't think any of our protocols are broken. I don't think we can fix any protocols to fix this problem, because the protocols aren't the attack vector. It seems to me that the attack vector is code that nobody cares to update, because they have absolutely zero incentive to update it. Now, it's so I write code that goes into Android, right? And, it's a billion devices, and manufacturers update it, they don't update it, maybe they update it, maybe they don't. For an IoT device, there is absolutely zero incentive to put any security at all in your initial build, because it means that you're going to be behind somebody else. And I don't see a good way around that except to say, okay, you must be this tall, to connect to the internet. Now, what would our role be in that? Our role might be to say, okay, here's a protocol that we can build so that a device can say in a secure way, here's the latest security update that I have, and it's signed by my manufacturer's key. And I support all these CVEs and I fix them. And so after a while, once we have that trusted attestation, we can say, okay, here's a bunch of bad devices, and we can try to decide what to do about them. And that's a technical solution. It's not attacking a problem, but it's providing a means that somebody could use to solve the problem in ways that are not going to necessarily change the model completely, right? And so, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mostly agree with you, but I have a little quibble, I think, with one of your premises, which is that the protocols aren't broken. So I agree with you that individual protocols may be accepting the DNS, are not broken in their fundament. But I think what I am partially arguing is that what we've done is we've designed a system which has as its property this basic vulnerability, and the solution to that cannot be, well, we need the endpoints to behave correctly, because if you're going to design a system in which there's no barrier to entry, and you don't have sort of access controls for who gets to come on, then you have to assume that some of those people are going to do bad stuff. And so the model that we had was a perfectly good one for a network where you could write away to the Network Information Center and get a list on paper of all of the humans that were connected to it. But we passed that thing some time ago, and we haven't done anything about our model of who gets to join. And I think the problem that I'm worried about is that the network doesn't have any other protections against this. It's really just got once you're in, you're in. Our bodies don't work that way. You get through the skin and you're still going to be defended against. Whereas what we've got really is you get through the skin and hey, you're wide open here. And that seems to me like a difference that we could do something about if we adopted a sort of immune response sort of environment to this. So I like the suggestion that you make, that what you could do is say, hey, wait a minute, we've sent out this inoculation against this problem, and you're not behaving like you're inoculated. Well, we can then identify you. So there might be something in that.
On the protocols, no protocol is broken if it doesn't survive a 2,000 to 1 attack. I mean, that's just not in the design space, right? You've got 1 million hosts trying to attack 10 machines. What are you going to do?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit more tempered on that. I kind of agree with you that if we can build software or do work that makes it easier, cheaper, and reduces the friction for people building these devices to have security by default, I think it doesn't solve things in a 100% case, but the more security we have, the better. And that's sort of one of the main points of my presentation, is that it is about scale. It's you can handle something that's 10 times bigger, maybe not 100 times bigger. If you can reduce the problem, then that's better than a lot of things that you can do.
Yeah, maybe we can at least reduce the asymmetry. Next, please.
Yeah, my name is Joseph Karagiannis, and I'm working for Huawei. First of all, I would like to thank you for this interesting and important session that you organized. In addition to that, I would like to mention that in addition to the security challenges that you have discussed, that somehow stimulate us to think on redesigning maybe the internet architecture, there are also other challenges that are related to privacy. So protection of personal data, and then data ownership. And in addition to that, you mentioned regulation. The European Commission, the European Parliament is actually working on the General Data Protection Regulation. So they have already defined a certain regulation on privacy. And there are also gaps on technology. So, and this might also stimulate us to think also in that area. So in addition to security, also privacy type of topics.
Okay, you get the last word except for me.
Hi, Roland Dobbins, Arbor Networks. I mitigate DDoS attacks for a living, and unfortunately, business is very good. A couple of comments. There are a lot of best current practices at all 7 layers of the OSI model and at the entire communications chain across the internet that if we could wave our magic wands and have them implemented immediately, the asymmetries that are so heavily in favor of the attackers right now would be greatly reduced. We would still have a DDoS problem, but it would be much more manageable. With regards to regulation, I'm a big fan of what's called backdoor regulation. And what I mean by that is there are regulations in place having to do with things like insurance, for example, different types of insurance that organizations have to carry, different types of policies and levels of policies that they have to carry because of laws and regulations that are often transnational in nature. I just had a very interesting conversation with a very large insurance underwriter, and they wanted to talk about their authoritative DNS and what their risk model was. And we had a good technical and operational conversation. But I told them, I said, you know, I'd really like to have an in-depth chat with you about your, quote, cyber, unquote, policies that you're writing, because I think you have a lot of unsecured risk that you're on the hook for, and that you and your friends in the actuarial associations really need to be briefed on this. And so I think that that's one way to get in some backdoor regulation, essentially through the insurance underwriters, to let them understand that they need to start really auditing organizations that they write policies for. Another comment I have in terms of regulation is that governments actually have a fantastic way to regulate without regulating, and it's called the RFP, the request for proposal. Governments can specify vendors that they purchase things from, services from, including things like internet transit and so forth. They can specify that verifiable steps have been taken by those organizations to implement reasonable best current practices that the industry recognizes. So I would encourage folks to cozy up to your local insurance actuary, to cozy up to your local purchasing folks in government and talk to them about this, because there are ways to get regulation without actually regulating. And I think that we really need to take a very strong look at that in addition to all of the different types of technological things we're doing. And finally, large jury verdicts are also a good incentive to get folks to do things. And I think that there's a lot of education that needs to take place in the legal industry in various countries, because there are doctrines like attractive nuisance and various forms of negligence that I think would apply here as well. And so while we're all working towards improving the technological situation, I think that we need to attack this problem, which is ultimately, it's a social problem, from the social side as well. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Suze, I just had a quick question to relay from Jabber, which is brief and I think worth relaying. And the question is from Elliot Lear, and it's where can we carry on this conversation? Which mailing list? Will you set up a mailing list?
Arch Discuss?
Yeah, so there is an IAB general list, Arch Discuss, that is open for anyone. And if we want to talk about big architectural things, that's a good place to do it.
Yeah, I was actually literally just trying to remember exactly the answer to that question, so thank you. We have run a little bit long, but I think this has been very, very good, very substantive. We did answer the question of where to continue the discussion, and I hope everybody will forgive me a shout out to my dad, who I think is really going to enjoy the archive of this discussion when he's feeling better. Thanks, everybody.
By all of you, if you want to yell at us. So I will invite the IAB to come up, and I think this is the right one. Nope. Oh, you'll fix it. All right. Oh, wait, there it is, page 29 of 34. I bet that's it. That's right. So I want to remind people that the IAB did produce a report that we produce before every meeting about our activities and so on, and so that's up on the IAB website and was sent to the announced list and the IETF list. So if you have questions for us, you can also send those. We just mentioned that if you want to discuss things about the architecture, please send that to the Arch Discuss list. And of course, if you want to address the IAB, you can send it to iab@iab.org, and we will receive that. So with that, I'm going to ask the members of the IAB to introduce themselves, and I'll start over here.
Brian Trammell.
Ted Hardy.
Dave Taylor.
Russ Housley.
Jari Ark.
Suzanne Wolf.
Heather Flanagan, not exactly IAB, but they don't know where else to put me.
Eric Nordmark. Oops.
Robert Sparks.
Lars Eggert, what Heather said.
Lee Howard.
Joe Hildebrand.
Yeah, Martin Sullivan.
I thought we were all Sullivans.
Okay, so this is the opportunity to ask anything you want of the IAB.
And the other people on the stage.
Yes, true enough.
Eric Klein, I had a few questions. The DMARC situation, do you think there'll be a draft about operational guidance or whatever coming out of it? Or do you think there is our guidance already, we just need to follow it?
So if you're asking about what the IETF is doing about our own mailing list problems in DMARC, yes, then I think we're talking about an email that will be discussed, sent and discussed on the list rather than a draft. Okay. That's my understanding at least.
So there's no document that needs to be written about we were doing this the wrong way, or we should have been doing this all the time, or something like that to follow DMARC guidelines, or it's not
Barry,
do you want
solvable. It was Barry Liba, one of the DMARC working group chairs. There is a document that says that outlines this issue. There are a number of suggested ways of mitigating it, each of which has its problems, and we don't have consensus on a recommendation for what to do. And there is a alternative to the existing DMARC spec called ARC that may be a short-term solution for some of this for people who want to implement that. That's all I can say about it at the moment, but the bottom line is we don't have consensus on how to mitigate the problem without causing more problems.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
And just to be clear for the record, what the IETF decides is not the IAB's fault. That target is not anywhere on my body.
Well.
You any other things going once, going twice?
Andrew.
Oh, have one over here. Thank you.
Question for you, Andrew. I have a comment about the item in Yari's slides about V6 only on the IETF network. Is now a good time to make that comment?
About V6 only. So you will note that the IAB made a statement that was pretty careful about what things it claimed. And one of the things, of course, the IAB never claims is what will happen in the future, because the IAB does not have perfect knowledge of the future. And if we did, we would all invest and be richer. Mm-hmm. So instead what we suggested is that there are these possibilities for the future, and one of the possibilities is that only V6 is going to be possible. I think, I mean, speaking only personally, I think it would be interesting to run an IETF in which the default SSID had V6 only, and we had, instead of the IETF V6 only network, that was the IETF network, and we had an IETF V4 V6 network or something like that. I think that would be interesting for us, an interesting experience for those of us who haven't done that. But that's my personal view. Mm-hmm. I don't want to speak for the IAB.
I'd like to take that a step further, and I'd like to provide a little bit of background. So one of the things that we're working on is, and my name is John Brzezowski from Comcast, by the way. We've been very active deploying V6 for years, and I think everybody recognizes that. We really needed it to kind of support our business needs. One of the things that is upcoming for us is we will be taking a brand new building that we're building in Philadelphia, be our kind of a new headquarters building, and it will be V6 only for end user devices at a bare minimum. V6 only in the form, but we will support, for example, NAT64 to support any remnants of V4 communications that are going to be needed, for my coworkers, right? The people I work with, they're my customers at work. They're a different set of customers. So one of the things that we're seeing is with the increase in V6 utilization, not only use of V6 but also traffic, that V4 is effectively declining. The use of it is declining, right? So I had exchanged some emails with a number of my compatriots here within the IETF, as well as some folks, Yari, Randy, Jim Martin, and some other folks, with a proposal or a suggestion. One of the things that we think makes a lot of sense is for this community in particular to get to a place where the primary SSID and the primary network that we use when we come here, for us to start to outline a path forward that looks like V6 only, and even if it includes NAT64, would someday, and the day being to be determined, that we turn off IPv4. I don't aim to me this is not an experiment, right? To me this is us eating our own dog food. So the suggestion that we've kind of laid out, and and the advice that I got from Yari and others, is to get feedback from the community, is we'd like to kind of lay out a very much an incremental plan that says, over these n number of meetings, we kind of gradually start to move ourselves towards the V6 only as primary network connection. We will provide a backup connection that will be, of course, dual stack, because we all recognize that we have day jobs, but with the ultimate goal to get to a place where every future IETF meeting has its primary SSID as V6 only, with NAT64 as kind of the help to get to V4. And then, of course, in cases where that does not exist, people would have the opportunity to flip back to, say, an IETF-dual stack network connection. I'll pause there to see, if there are any comments or.
Why don't you stop there?
Yeah, so just from my perspective, I personally, like Andrew, would like to see some of this, and I think the incremental approach is exactly what we need, and sort of taking practical steps forward that we have, fault-tolerant setups and whatever else that we need, and ultimately we'll be in a place where most of this community can use the V6 only network and not feel any pain. I think that's an excellent project for us to do. My opinion, of course, only. So whatever you guys say is more important.
Yari, this is Lee Howard down here at the end. How would you like us to write that plan? Would you like to see an internet draft? Would you like to see email? Would you like to talk about it now?
Maybe not now, unless
That's
you can,
not,
the next 30 seconds, but internet draft would be great. And actually, the format doesn't matter so much, but it needs to be a collaboration between, people, different people, not just, the hardest V6 geeks.
Hey, Russ, do you remember IETF 71?
Very well.
Yeah, Mark Townsley, by the way. Yeah, we turned off IPv4 for an hour, and it was very educational, because that was a long time ago. Yeah, okay. He was in Philly, in fact. There you go. Right on, John. I think it's about time that we make V6 only NAT64, which should work on all of his devices. This is David, he works for Apple. Or else you don't get into the store and we might have to talk to Spotify or whoever was having a problem. It should work on your devices as well, that's Google, with your 464XLAT thingy, right? Which is built in. So we have two different ways, both documented, and it should work on all your Androids and your Apples. I don't know about Thaler's devices. I don't know about the Windows. But, maybe. But we should be doing that. And you know what? We wouldn't be the first ones. There are other technical conferences of size that are doing this already. Okay, and I'd be happy to take my Andrew Yortachenko, who has done this again and again and again, to come help and do whatever technical support in the NOC. Here I am, signing off on his travel budget right now. But to go help John make that happen at the Comcast-hosted IETF, and just make it the default. And during the plenary, we turn off the NAT64 again, just for kicks.
So I'm going to cut the mic lines because we have two more bodies up here that get to be the recipients of this excellent discussion. So I have two people. I have Spencer and. And are you done?
I am done. I'm just
okay. So I have two people. So
Yeah,
start over here.
Spencer Dawkins. I wanted to thank the IB for sending Brian Trammell to come talk to TSV area today about protocol transitions. Dave Thaler introduced that for us in Berlin, and we continued that conversation in a transport context about transition, what transition means for transport protocols. I thought that was a really helpful session. I wanted to thank you all for doing that work and for sending smart people to come talk to us after you did it.
Thank you.
Hi, David Skenazy from Apple. I just wanted to say that I fully support John's initiative. I really would like this to happen, and the main reason for that is dog fooding. Like IPv6 only with NAT64 isn't a research project anymore, it's real-life deployments. T-Mobile, for example, has been running this for all their customers in the US on Android for a while, and starting with the betas, they're doing it for iOS as well. A lot of us here are engineers, a lot of us write code. If you were to write it on a network like this, you would realize that every so often your software that you're writing doesn't work when your device doesn't have a v4 address anymore. So this initiative, I think, would help improve a lot of the software that we as a community are writing to help the transition to IPv6.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that, I will invite the IAB to sit down, and I forget who is up next.
IOC.
IOC and the Trust and the IAD, please.
Great. So maybe we can start with introductions. John, would you like to?
I'm John Levine.
I'm still Andrew.
Lou Berger.
Still Leslie.
Still Yari.
Still Tobias, IETF Trust Chair.
Benson.
Ray Pelletier.
And Kathy Brown, the Internet Society CEO, couldn't join us this week. So here we are. Here you are. Any questions? Go ahead.
Eric Klein. I had a question about the funding that you presented. Is now an acceptable time to ask that?
That's the idea.
I think I overheard Mark Townsley personally volunteering to be a gold sponsor, but for the rest of us, is there a GoFundMe page for the IETF, or do we need one?
Yeah, Ray, do you want to, or Yari?
IETF endowment. Support IETF. Something. I should remember this. Leslie, do you remember it?
So I think, let's tease out a part of it. There is an IETF endowment, as Yari mentioned, as we've heard in plenary before, that's looking to collect money for answering those questions that we had in the longer run, right? Building up a fund for the IETF. In terms of how do we go about actually, I was talking about the next year funds, getting through our budget and our meetings for next year. We don't have a GoFundMe. There are small sponsorship opportunities, but I think that I would turn it around and say, we don't have a GoFundMe or a, click here to donate for the meetings other than register for the meetings. But maybe if you think that there are, if anyone thinks that there are opportunities for sponsorship that are different than we've outlined in the sponsorship plan, I think Howie and Ray would love to hear that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, if I can add one more thing. So indeed, IETF endowment, you can personally contribute and just take your credit card and feed it in, it should work.
Yari, it's sustainietf.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Dave Crocker was first, Mike.
Thanks, Dave Crocker. So historically, we've had essentially one pot of money to get and spend and a pattern that accounts for both. And with the trust having its own, what I'll call P&L line, where's that money coming from?
So in this year, the money for the trust has been coming from ISOC in 2 individual donations. We are currently looking into how to fund the next year and the year after the next years. We have not come up with a good and clear strategy for that yet.
Okay, thanks.
Lorenzo Colletti, follow up on the sort of fund situation. Companies do have an option of increasing their contributions to the IETF by in the form of their employees electing to register late. Now, I personally do this at every IETF meeting because I find that I think it's valuable to my company, and I think that spending that money giving that money to IETF is worthwhile. Now, my question is this something we'd want to encourage, or would it totally wreck your logistics?
I think Ray would probably lose all the rest of his hair if everybody registered on the last
All right, so
day,
don't do that, you're saying. Okay.
No, I'm not saying don't do that.
No, do it, yeah.
All right, he's heard him.
As long as you still register, okay? As long as you still sign up.
Register and pay late, that's all, no problem.
Consensus, rough consensus, register early, pay late, okay?
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much.
All right, and if I can get the IST on stage as well. This picture, by the way, is from the local demonstration a couple of days ago.
Were they humming?
Well,
Over here.
all right, so maybe we go through the introductions. Spencer, you'll get to start.
Sure. I'm Spencer Dawkins. I'm one of the transport area directors.
I'm Benoit Claes, Operations and Management, sorry.
Alyssa Cooper, Applications in Real Time.
Aaliyah Atlas, Routing.
Alberto Ratana, Routing.
Mia Kulevin, Transport.
Terry Manderson, Interior.
Stiliari.
Ben Campbell, Application in Real Time.
I'm Andrew.
Suresh Krishnan, Internet.
Deborah Brungard, Routing Area.
Jolie Egley, Operations and Management.
Alexei Melnikov, Applications in Real Time.
Kathleen Moriarty, Security Area.
All right, so if anybody has questions, we'd be happy to take them, or comments.
Pete Resnick. I hate being first. I hope I'll be last. Relatively quick. I didn't make the chair's lunch today, but I heard there was some discussion about different things that could be done for modes of meeting arrangements. And one that I like is the whole idea of doing squares or U's so that people are facing each other. I heard there were two complaints about that have been discussed, one of which was well, we've offered it, but chairs haven't taken it. And the other is it would make for unfairness because some people would be at the table and some people would not be. To the first, you have steer in your name. People like doing things the way they've always done them, and especially you've got a bunch of things to do as chair to set up a meeting. Push folks to use that model. It works really nicely, and you should encourage them to do so. But as to the second, I want to make sure that you all are clear and that everyone's clear that the current model of having people at the front talking to the room structurally makes it more unfair because you've got people who are seen as authority talking to the room. And yeah, if chairs don't allocate the number of table seats, there are going to be some people who want to be at the front table who are further back. They're still facing the middle. It's not preventing them from participating. It's less fun. But the way we've got it set up now, we've got document authors being seen as in charge. We've got chairs being seen as being in charge. We've got the few people up at the front who talk quietly with each other and the people in the back with their faces and their laptops. Push folks to use this model. It will break this idea of we use the meeting time to do presentations so that the authoritative people can continue to be seen as authoritative.
Thank you for that. I at least personally agree very much. With regards to the first comment, I think the ISG recognizes that, and we keep recommending that we try different things in the working groups, and we also recognize that that's a potentially a long process for people to learn and get suitable opportunity in their working groups life cycle to try that and so forth. So I think we're getting there.
So, Yari, if I could just say something. So I was the one that led the discussion at the working group chairs lunch today. And I think the biggest thing that I was asking for two things from the working group chairs. One was for them to talk to each other about what they're doing in different working groups, and so that they can kind of compare and see what might work well. And I don't mean just in like setting up a room or something like that, although that that's 15% of the kinds of things that I think we're thinking of. The other, so talking to each other, and then thinking about what they need in order for working groups to be more effective. One of the points I made during the discussion was that we see a lot of meetings that don't use classroom-style seating, but the working group, almost all the working groups do, not all, but a lot of them do. We're talking about things that are not one size fits all for, every working group is different, so things that work for big working groups don't work for small working groups. But I really wanted to thank Pete for raising the issue, and I would have said it using the word hierarchical. One of the things that really struck me when I came to the IETF in the first place was the idea that there's no kings, no presidents, and having every time we can send a message that we're not a hierarchy, I think that's a good thing. I would have thought that putting me on the ISG as an area director would have proved that the leadership are not special, but let's see how that goes.
So, yes, we need to keep trying to do new things, and it's hard because we know how to do what we've been doing. Today in NVO 3, we had 3 small group breakout sessions with pads of paper, and the room went from staring at their laptops and being rather apathetic, I'm afraid, to actually having some really good discussions. It still ends up being small, with facilitators, smaller groups of people talking, a number of people listening and learning, but the energy in the room completely changed. We have another meeting tomorrow to carry out the summaries and see how it went and all. But we had pads of paper, and there was a lot of ability to be more interactive, and I think the chairs and I were all very happy. So I'd really encourage talking to people who were in the meeting or talking to the chairs and seeing what you can try, because it really can make a difference.
Margaret?
Margaret Cullen. I proposed a BOF for this meeting. And it's the first time I've proposed a BOF since I proposed the BOF for what became NetConf, I don't know, a long, long time ago. And when I proposed that BOF for NetConf, there was a very interesting discussion between the ISG and the IAB about that BOF, and I was present. They had the proponents of the BOF dialed into the call at the time that that was discussed. But this one, I can tell because I've heard about it from multiple people, there was a very interesting discussion between the ISG and the IAB about my BOF, but I was not present. And I'm not like freaking out about this or anything, but I think it was better the other way. And I wonder if you guys want to comment on that and whether you think it might be possible to reinstate that sort of thing.
That's a good question and a good point, actually. I don't recall the NetConf time, or maybe I wasn't on the ISG at the time, but...
it was before I was on the ISG.
Yeah, okay. So I think we actually have multiple different things. So one is that we actually have to make a final determination. We had all these discussions, and then the ISG, or the AD in question, makes a decision with some help from the IAB, and that's the call that we're having. Now we're at least publishing the minutes from that call. Previously they were sort of, not so visible. But I kind of agree with you, but we used to have more discussions beforehand. We had a BOF, and then, that proposal idea went, there was an email that went to the proponents and the relevant director and the ISG and the IAB, and we discussed it. And that, I think, is maybe something that we should do more. I sort of confess that that's not entirely well done today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this gets a little bit to the issue we were just discussing, right? In that it's plausible that some of us, and I'm not saying myself in this particular case, but that some of the people who are proposing BOFs are more expert than anyone who's on the call when the ISG and IAB are on the call to discuss that topic. And it doesn't send that message that you believe that when it's discussed and decisions are made about it without those people present.
So Yari, if I could interject briefly, I believe that the BOF coordination call this time was tacked on to a formal telechat, which was open for anyone in the community to join. And I think what maybe Margaret was asking for is to, make sure that people that are BOF proponents know when that call is coming.
Well, I mean, just having it be open would be fine. I mean, they used to call you in when your thing was going to be discussed, which, meant you waited around, but I didn't mind waiting around. But an open call would be even better if people were informed when it was going to be.
Yeah, I'm just going to push back just a little bit, because I actually think that that call is the wrong time to have, like a pre-BOF of the event. That the time would actually be before that. This is a call where you go through like 15 different things. And there's really no time to dwell into the details of each and every one, but we absolutely have to have that discussion with the proponents and people who think it's a bad idea, and the ISP and then the ISG and the IAB. But I'm not sure that call is the right place. I do fundamentally agree that it needs to happen.
Yeah, I'm not saying there should be particular logistics, but if you guys could think about how to make those discussions happen again, or possibly they never happen for all BOFs. Maybe they only happen for one IETF. I have no idea. I think that would be a good thing.
Benoit?
So I think it's a good idea to have more information from the proponents, but then I'm thinking, should we also invite the opponents then? And then shall we run into the risk of running the BOF at the call where we're just supposed to decide if we want a BOF or not? I don't have the answer, right? I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a whole bunch of them where you're just going to say yes, and the conversation will be very short. But clearly there was a much longer conversation about this particular BOF, and it would have maybe been helpful to be present for it. That's all.
And Miriam Suresh and...
So we also had calls where we invited proponents. If we don't do that, I believe that the area director who's responsible for that part has a good view on what the BOF is about and is able to answer all the questions, while the actual discussion between also the leadership, but also between the community and the proponents should happen in the BOF and not in that call. And like, because we all like to talk, sometimes the discussion goes a little bit more than it should be in that call, but actually the BOF should be the place to have the discussion.
Suresh, Joel, Spencer?
So one thing I would like to say is, right, like when the BOF request is getting formed, like when the stuff is getting put into the wiki, the earlier you put the stuff in, the better it is for the IESG to do something. So if, let's say, some of the stuff comes in like a month before the deadline, it's easier to rotate. Like in this specific case, it came in an hour before the deadline, right? So there's really not that much iteration you could have done. I think that would be like a really, really good place to do this kind of talking before the call. And I agree with Yari, like there's too many things on the call. This time I think like there's like much less BOFs than last time. But last time we had like 15 things to discuss, and there's no way we can actually dedicate the time for the time the BOF discussion deserves on that call.
And Joel, and briefly, because we're half an hour over time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've done, simply because the workload is higher, is front-end loaded. So that means the call is sort of a coordination activity and to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row. So it's too late at that point to have that discussion. So if we need to have that discussion, it has to happen earlier, and maybe we should break that out into small pieces.
And one of the criteria for accepting a BOF is that there's sufficient discussion on the mailing list about this topic, and that I think is maybe the primary thing. Spencer, one more comment on this?
I really like Suresh's suggestion about getting stuff to us early. I could imagine us having conversations about BOFs that we have a lot of questions about, even on our an informal telechat or something like that before the BOF cutoff. If we see something and we have questions, it really is a if the BOF cutoff is on Friday, and like by the next or Monday, and by the next Thursday we're making decisions. And if we have 10 BOFs on the call, we're not spending a lot of time on each one. But I like the idea of us being more open. And we used to do a lot more, the ISD used to do a lot more stuff that was closed. The closed stuff for us now is mostly personnel related.
Margaret, we're done, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you. We will do something on this and try to make sure that we are as transparent as possible, maybe not on the call, but somehow. And then I'll close the mics, but 2 more questions here.
Yeah, and Jen Linkova, just coming back to the previous topic of getting people more involved during the session. Ali, a question to you. When you did this experiment today, do you have any feedback from remote participants?
I did get feedback pretty immediately from some folks in the room who were like, this is so much better, thank you. And I continue to get some of that feedback. A lot of the folks who I tried to ask how it was going afterwards had gotten too deep into the technical conversation to be able to disengage to talk about the format, which was a complete change that I regard as quite useful. Yeah, exactly, because they were actually engaged in the technical conversation, which was part of what I was trying to force. I don't think that the small group discussion is right for all working groups all the time. It was the right thing for this working group at this time, and just like what one size fits all, but trying things is really key.
Stuart, last word.
Stuart Bryant. So Margaret raised an interesting point about getting the technical expertise on the BOF calls. Maybe the IESG should experiment with allowing authors to speak during complicated document discussions, because the authors will have a lot of knowledge about the content of their document.
Yeah, we do that.
We do.
We do, even when you were on the ISG.
No. You can listen,
No,
but
you-
very
No.
rarely
No.
can
No.
speak.
We invite them to
authors and
participate.
shepherds, yeah.
Sorry?
Yes, we invite authors and shepherds to speak on the calls when it seems
Oh,
appropriate.
it's changed then, okay.
And we even invite them on the informal telechats at times to give larger presentations in advance of being on a formal telechat.
Oh, that's really, really great. I mean, I've never not
But
experienced it. It's really great that you've moved forward to do that. Thank you.
And of course, we also have sort of made our calls quite short in these days, that they are, checkpoints rather than the actual substantive discussion, because substantive discussion goes to the working group mailing list where everybody can participate, whether their, their time zone is this or that and so forth. So I think that's the right model. But yes, that's important. So thank you. I think this is it. Apologies for taking a little bit longer than planned. I did want to say one thing about this NAT64 IETF idea, and I at least heard here that there's plenty of people who are interested in working on that, so let's get together. I'm also personally interested. Let's get together, make a plan, and just a plan. Let's start doing the steps and see what kind of incremental change we have ready for the next IETF, and then after that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.